everyone. I'm the groundwater guy, Tom Ballard, and our topic today is the vital importance of proper well seals. Most people would think this is kind of a boring topic, and it's one that gets overlooked a lot. But I will tell you, there's a lot of importance there, and we'll go over that today. If you're around, if you can drop a question or a comment in the chat, let us know you're there. Or if you have any questions as we go along, you're certainly welcome to drop a comment in the chat, and we will answer those for you as we move through the presentation here. So with that, let's dive in. And so why are well seals so important? I can tell you that as a hydrogeologist that we look at a lot of wells and contamination issues, especially things like nitrates, and a lot of times it's related back to an inadequate well seal. That's just flat out the issue. One of the first things I ask for when we're doing diagnostics on a well is to look at the well log so that I can check the seal or the seal information. And we'll have a little case study we'll talk about later where we looked at that, and you'll kind of see how that looking at the well logs really does pay off. But it's really one of the first things I ask for people when we do diagnostics is, what does your well log say? How is the well constructed? Because a lot of times, especially something like nitrates, it's going to be a surface water or intrusion or shallow water intrusion issue, and it's going to be related back to a well seal flat out. So yeah, I would say the vast majority of nitrate issues in wells are related to well seals. So it really is true that geology counts. You can say I'm a little biased as a hydrogeologist, but geology really does count in this case, because what well seals really do, and we'll talk about this here, but what well seals really do is they take into account the geology, or they should take into account the geology. Sometimes they don't, and that's where we run into problems. But where they do take into account the geology, they should be sealing off those zones, those upper zones of poor water quality, or where you can get surface water intrusion coming in your well. So the geology really does count. And looking at when we're putting in a well, doing the geologic well log is really going to help us determine where we put our seals and how we construct our well, where the screens go. Everybody's interested in where the screens go and getting a lot of water out, but what you don't want is you don't want things like nitrates coming in your well. So that's just as important as getting the screens right. We want to get the seals right as well. Okay, so the purpose of well seals, just short in a couple short sentences here, is we want to stabilize the upper portion of the boring and casing. That's going to be so it doesn't move around, protects it from corrosion, and so you're going to the shallow zone is really going to be where you're going to get a lot of corrosion. We see this a lot where we've had inadequate well seals and we get corrosion, especially if you have mild steel casing. And so the seal should really help protect that upper part of the well. And then the most obvious thing that we're really going to be focused on today is preventing the vertical migration of poor quality or contaminated groundwater. And that's the biggest deal here, and that's where we run into problems. So we do see issues, and I've seen that upper part, the stabilizing part is important, because we just looked at a well here recently where my gosh, they did not have an adequate well seal, and the upper part of the casing, the upper 8-10 feet, was actually just gone. It was corroded away. It was about ready to collapse in. We had to do some emergency repairs. So that is important too, because you really this was their only producing well. So if it had failed at that point, then it's really something that you can't tolerate. So that part is important too. But our focus today is really going to be preventing the vertical migration of poor quality or contaminated groundwater. So let's look at a typical well construction here, and the arrow there shows our shallow zone, and that's usually where our culprit is going to be is that shallow groundwater, surface water, and so those are the zones we're probably going to want to seal off. It's usually going to be poor quality water anyway, even if it doesn't have contaminants in it. So generally, we're going to go for some of these deeper aquifers. In this case, we sorry about that. Did not turn my phone off. That's the problem with going live. All right, so back to the show. So we got a couple aquifer zones here. This well is screened in the lower aquifer, the deeper aquifer, but you can see where our well seal extends all the way down through that clay and silt, sealing everything off up above and only producing water from that deeper zone. And especially it's sealing off that upper sand and gravel zone where we have the arrow at that could potentially be contaminated. If you add nitrates, if you're near agricultural area, you might have nitrates in that shallow zone, and that could easily get into your well if you didn't adequately seal that off. So, at a minimum, if we wanted to go after the shallow aquifer and also screen in that shallow aquifer there, then we'd want to have our seal extend down through that upper sand and gravel zone through that clay, that upper clay and silt zone, which would be called an aquitard, and then we could actually screen in that shallow aquifer zone, and then screen down in the deeper aquifer zone too, if we wanted to take that water too. So this particular diagram just shows it screened in the lower zone, but the trick is sealing off that upper zone. So that's your basic typical well diagram. Okay, so getting into a little more detail, the purpose of the seal is we're looking at the annular space. So that's the space between the casing and the borehole wall. So we've drilled down and to give ourselves enough room to put in the casing and screen, we have an annular space. And different states are going to have different requirements for how much room you have between the borehole wall and the casing wall, and we'll look at that in just a little bit. But that is where the seal is going to go. So you need to have adequate room there to seal the annular space and keep that any contaminated or poor quality water from migrating down from the surface into the well. So the big part of the seal there. So it can be a preferential pathway for the movement of this water. So water wants to move down, and if you have an inadequate seal or there's void spaces in there, then you can get that surface water, that shallow groundwater that may be impacted with nitrates or some other things, and that can move down and contaminate your well water. So, all right. And the secondary purpose of the annular seal is to protect the casing against corrosion or degradation, like we mentioned earlier. Um, you want to ensure the structural integrity. And in California, for instance, you have the ground can move around a little bit, and that seal will actually kind of keep things intact. Obviously, if you get a big earthquake or a lot of ground movement, it's going to flex a little too much. But for the most part, we've seen that wells and even in earthquake zones can withstand some of that if you got an adequate seal, and that kind of holds things together. So it'll stabilize the borehole wall also. So it is the secondary purpose, and like I say, in a lot of cases we see that actually is very important. And unfortunately, we only see those cases when there's been a poor job done. So that's generally when I get called in is there's been a poor job done, and so we see the effects of that, like that well I mentioned where the upper part of the casing was completely corroded away because of an inadequate seal. Okay, so looking at surface water intrusion or shallow water intrusion from our illustration of the well earlier, there was an interesting study done in California, and this is a California study from 2002 to 2010, And what they really looked at was principal contaminant detections in wells throughout the state, and they classified these. And so we see them all here, and I'm kind of a little bit in the way there, but you can see they're grouped into two different categories. We have naturally occurring, and then we have anthropogenic, which is basically man-made. The anthropogenic contaminants are really going to be, uh, you're going to see those showing up in shallow groundwater. They're going to be things like nitrates, like I mentioned earlier, which is the second most common contaminant in California drinking water. Arsenic being the number one contaminant. Um, Radionuclides rank right up there. That's going to be naturally occurring for the most part. But then we get down to things like perchlorate, PCE, TCE, the solvents. You have uranium in there. That's another radionuclide. And then we have some other pesticides, and then fluoride is naturally occurring. And then we have carbon tetrachloride still around after all these years, very stable solvent. DCE, DCA. These are solvents and gasoline additives, and then we start to see some of the other gasoline additives. So you can see there's quite a few in the top 10 that are actually anthropogenic. These are going to be shallow groundwater issues. So this is what the seal is going to protect you against is really looking at the contaminant pathways to go into the well. And this is I was serious when I said geology really counts when we were talking about this earlier, because we got to, when we're logging the well and doing the geologic log, we have to look at what our potential contaminants are and the pathway that those can make it into our well screen zone, and make sure that we've adequately sealed those off. And you see there's a whole host of contaminants here. This was a very interesting study, kind of eye opening, but you can see here obviously some of these things um, are a whole different ball game. Arsenic, that's a topic for another day, how we deal with arsenic and radionuclides. But things like nitrates, perchlorate, these things are going to be issues that are mostly, for the most part, going to be addressed by having an adequate seal. All right, so here we go. This is an illustration of an inadequate seal here. You can see we have a well here. We have an upper shallow groundwater zone. We have a confining unit, which is probably going to be a clay, and the interface right here is where the red arrow is. And then we have our aquifer where we've actually had the well screened. But in this case, we have an inadequate seal here, because the seal should actually extend down and probably 10 feet into that confining unit, because now what we've done is we've created a pathway for groundwater to flow along the annular space where we got gravel pack, and that can move down. And if you have nitrates, for instance, in this well, or any other contaminants, that can move down. Especially things like solvents, PCE, TCE, that are heavier than water. These can move down. And usually, what's going to happen is there's going to be a head difference. If you have a confined aquifer down below and unconfined up above, there's going to be a head difference that can set up different heads are going to cause groundwater movement to circulate in that well and can actually drag down the contaminants. So really, really important. And once again, geology counts here, because we really need to be looking at this when we're constructing and designing this well. And unfortunately, I have seen this situation happen out in the field. It was actually some monitoring wells for a dry cleaner site, where they actually they screened them through multiple aquifers and did not seal them properly. So they actually managed to move the PCE from the dry cleaner down into a lower aquifer zone. And I'll tell you, as a consultant, you probably don't have to have enough insurance to cover that issue. So you really got to be paying attention to this stuff when you're logging the holes, and make sure you design things properly. Okay, so when it comes to well seals or actually well construction in general, there are a number of well standards out there that we follow. Different states have their own state standards, and the National Groundwater Association has kind of a national standard. I don't know how much that gets used. The one that most people really look at in conjunction with their state standards is the American Water Works Association A100 water well standard. That gets updated at least every 5 years, I think, and it's really a pretty good standard. We tend to spec that out in our specifications when we're bidding out well projects. We spec out, not only the state standards, but also the AWWA A100 standard in there, and we expect that those procedures will be followed because they're good procedures. So these are places you can look to get some information if you're interested in reading these things. I'll look at the different state standards. Really, what I'm going to do is I'm registered in Tennessee and California. I'm also a California certified hydrogeologist. So I thought I'd just take and compare the well standards, the state well standards for California and Tennessee, and you can kind of see some of the differences. And different states are going to be they're going to have different requirements, different standards, but this will give you a little bit of a contrast. California, of course, is going to be probably more voluminous regulations, a little more over the top. Tennessee, a little lighter on the regulations, and you'll see that as we go through these things here, and it's just going to vary state by state. So no matter what state you're in, you really want to consult your state well standards and make sure that you're following those. The AWWA A100 standard is a good standard to use and is probably going to go beyond most state standards, but you want to make sure there's not a mismatch there, and the state standard is calling for something that you're not doing. But so you really need to read these things through and check them when you're constructing a well, and really these things should be part of your well specs when you bid it out. So that's important. All right. So in California, we have the California well standards that are put out by the Department of Water Resources, and it's a little funny because California has two, and one does not replace the other. They kind of work in conjunction together. So there's DWR Bulletin 74-81. It was released in 1981, and DWR Bulletin 74-90. So it was released in 90. So while there's a little bit of overlap, for the most part, they're complementary. So you gotta use them together, which is a little challenging. I know they're working on updating these things, but we've been hearing that for a number of years. I know there's some drafts floating around out there, but they still have not adopted new well standards yet. So that is coming. I would hope to see that in the next year or so, but who knows? It with the drought and things like that out in California, we're seeing it. Stuff like this kind of gets shoved back sometimes. So, but that's really what you're looking at now. I will tell you that that you can get the hard copies of these things, which are hard to come by, but they do have a combined version that's available online, and I think I got that. Yeah, here we go on the screen share here. This is the Department of Water Resources site. You can look for California well standards combined. I'm not going to give you the full URL because it's a long one, but you can see here that we have Bulletin 7481, Bulletin 7490, and it kind of goes through and gives you the these are hyperlinked, these are not for some reason, but it kind of goes through the different sections. You can see the water well standards are going to be covered in both 7481 and 7490. The monitoring well standards for monitoring wells are going to be addressed in 7490 only. Cathodic protection wells, which really doesn't interest us so much, is covered in Bulletin 7490, and then the appendices and the figures. There are some figures. I'll show you the important figures when it comes to uh, the the well seals actually. So, and then you go up here, and this is the link to actually different sections. So we would be in part 2 here. So we'd go here, and you can see our different sections here. The sealing the upper annular space. You can see our regulations here. Um, Sealing conditions. It goes through things in great detail here. Significant clay layers, so we want to seal into those layers. For hard rock formations, or what we'd call fractured bedrock formations, there's some different standards there because obviously a lot of these are open borehole, gravel packed wells, converted wells. That's something that we don't see very often. And wells that penetrate poor quality water, pollutants, or contaminants. We'll talk about that a little bit more here, but they specifically address how you isolate those. Conductor casing, sealing materials, goes into great detail on the types of cement and sealing materials you can use. You can see this really goes on for forever there. Um, and The radial thickness of the seal, California is looking at a minimum of 2 inches. Placement, they want you to use on, especially on municipal wells, using centralizers to make sure that you get an adequate seal in all directions. And some other material here. We're going to look at some of these diagrams here in a little bit, but pressure sealing and so that's really the section on well seals. So let me get back here, and so in summary, the important parts of the California seal requirements are an oversized hole of at least 4 inches to account for the annular seal. So that's going to give you 2 inches on each side. That's the minimum seal they want to see. Sealing material shall consist of a neat cement, sand cement, concrete, or bentonite. They tend to discourage using bentonite, and neat cement is generally not something that they're looking at anymore. So really a concrete is what they're using. They found the neat cement, which is mixed with bentonite, tends to form some cracks and it desiccates and defeat the purpose of the seal. So there was a study done in Kansas on a grout study, and that's what they determined. So California has taken that to heart, and so they're really not approving neat cement anymore. And then a minimum of 2 inches of sealing material maintained between all casings and the borehole wall in all directions. So that's where the centralizers actually come into play. So that's why you want to use centralizers. The minimum seal depth. This is a point of contention sometimes because this is minimum seal depth, but a lot of times drillers and people that are looking at putting in the wells, they basically say, okay, we got to have a 50-foot seal, and that's what you end up with. But once again, like I pointed out, geology counts here. So this is really a minimum depth. It needs to, if you have a community water supply well, which is what we're interested here, it needs to be a minimum depth of 50 feet. It may require 100 or 200 feet of seal to adequately seal off some of that some of those zones we've been talking about. And so you got to look at the geology, look at the potential contaminant sources, and really understand things before you put in the seal. Don't just throw in a 50-foot seal and call it good, because this is where we tend to run into problems where we've seen situations where time and time again, where they put in a 50-foot seal because the regulations say you got to have a 50-foot seal, and ignore the word minimum, and just put in a 50-foot seal, and then boom, we got a nitrate issue because they're not sealing off that upper zone. They got a 50-foot seal, but it doesn't adequately seal off. It doesn't take into account the geology. It does not adequately seal off that upper zone. So this is important to understand, and I really spend a lot of time talking to people about this is the minimum seal depth. So it's not the required seal depth, it is the minimum seal depth. So you got to take the geology into account. Okay, so these are some illustrations from the California well standards. In unconsolidated rock, you can see we're looking at on the upper right there. You can see we've got soil, we got sand and gravel, and then we have a clay zone. So we're actually sealing into that clay zone. Usually about 10 feet is what's going to be adequate here, and then you have your aquifer zones down below in your screen zone. So that's going to be an adequate seal there. Um, the down below here, once again, we see the same situation where we've got this maybe a little bit more of a porous bedrock sandstone, but you got a claystone or shale aquitard there. So we're sealing off that upper zone, and we're actually sealing down below the clay zone here. So to make sure that we get our actual 10 feet of seal. So you're going to want to have a minimum of 10 feet separating the bad water zone, the potentially poor quality water zone, and your aquifer for a seal. So when we get into fractured rock can be a little tricky because we've seen situations where we've had fractures that are connected to the surface, connected to the well, 100 or 200 feet below the surface. And once again, this is where geology really counts, is understanding how the fractures are going to work. And this particular in our that situation, we were looking at nitrate contamination in the well, and we determined that these fractures were connected or interconnected anyway to the surface, and there was an area where they'd been storing manure, a pile, and it was actually causing nitrates to work their way down through the fractures and into the well. This was an open hole fractured rock well, and it was about 115 feet down or so. So yeah, it can happen, and that's why once again it's important to understand the geology and to log the hole so you understand, especially in fractured bedrock, because it's hard to understand where the fractures really run. You can't obviously see it. There are ways of tracing these things out. That gets a little expensive, but you really need to understand that these fractures can be connected to the surface, and ones that are obviously connected to the surface need to be sealed off. Now, in the case of the well we were talking about, we actually had to go back in there and add more seal to seal these zones off. So do some well modification, and that gets to be quite expensive. Um, once again, you can see some other illustrations here, but the top illustration here is the one I was really trying to make my point on, is seals in fractured rock. You want to seal off the fractured zones that seem to be obviously connected to the surface and provide a conduit for those shallow groundwater, poor quality water to get into the well and contaminate it. All right, another issue for seals is sealing off strata. So generally, what we're going to do is when we put in a new well, we're going to do zone testing and look and see where our poor quality water is. Try to trace that back to the geology and determine if we need to seal off any zones as we're constructing the well. That's the easiest and most cost-effective way to do it. Sometimes you're making a compromise between how much water you can produce and getting rid of contaminants, but that's kind of a mass balance calculation you need to do and make sure that works. But but we can also go in and modify wells and seal problem zones in existing wells. It's a little more challenging, a little more expensive, but it can be done, and it can be useful in avoiding treatment. So it may be expensive, but it's going to be a lot less expensive than putting in a treatment plant. So once again, In California, sealing material, they specify in the DWR well standards that the sealing material should consist of neat cement, cement grout, or bentonite clay. Typically, it's going to be cement. These other things are probably not going to be adequate for the purposes. So you're going to see the regulators really want to see a cement grout in that situation. So So this is the wording, and there's a lot of. Sorry, this is a little bit of a busy slide here, um, but what we're looking at is this is the wording from the well standards. So in areas where a well penetrates more than one aquifer, and one or more of the aquifers contains water that is poor quality, and if it mixes with your aquifer, that it can deteriorate the quality of the water. So in these situations, we want to seal off that water to prevent the mixing of that poor quality water with our good quality aquifer water. So that's really what that's saying. So um, and the way they word it is the strata producing the undesirable quality water shall be sealed off by placing impervious material, and that's going to be your cement usually, opposite the strata and opposite the confining formation. So you're going to seal off that zone, and you're going to seal it no less than 10 feet above and below those zones. So that way you're going to get an adequate seal. Even if the confining zone, the clay zone that you're sealing into, is less than 10 feet, you still want to extend that seal 10 feet. So what does that look like? Well, where the arrow is, you can see this is our zone of poor quality water, and you can see the seal here. And this is another illustration out of the California well standards. So you can see that what they've done here is we have 10 feet above and below this zone where we've actually extended the seal to seal off that poor quality water zone where the arrow is. So that's how that needs to be done. Like I say, once again, it's easier to do this when you're designing the well, and that's why the zone testing is really important when you're constructing the well to understand where may have poor quality water. And you tie that back to the geologic log, and you can understand how you can design the well to really keep that poor quality water out and avoid treatment. So sometimes it's not always possible, to avoid treatment, but in most cases, you probably can, especially in this situation here. All right. So in contrast, we look at Tennessee well standards, and those are available online also. I have a PDF that I'll show you in just a minute, but this is really what they look at is that they have 18 sections here. We're mainly concerned, or when you're in Tennessee, you're concerned with section 10 here. So at the top of the second column there, well construction standards. So there's a lot of other stuff in examinations and licenses and all the stuff for the drillers, but we're really concerned about the well construction standards. So that's so let me show you that here. I'm gonna blow that up a little bit so you can see it because it's. Let's check that out and see if that works a little better. Yeah, you can read that a little better. So, okay, so this is section 10, our well construction standards, and you can see that we go down through here, and here's submitting reports and that type of thing. So, um, notices required. It's really not till we get down here. Here's location. Some standards on location. Minimum separation distances. These are California has these too. This is important. You're going to want to have an adequate seal, but you're also going to want to have separation between things like leach ponds, pit privies. I guess that's outhouses, sewer lines, septic tanks, and drain fields. 50 feet, I think, is probably a little inadequate, especially when you get in certain parts of Tennessee where they have a karst and it can move pretty quickly. So I would say 50 feet is a minimum, is probably inadequate. So source of water supply, they really say that anything less than 19 feet is not inadequate, is probably subject to surface water contamination. So they're going to want you to have the source of water be at least 19 feet below the surface. So that'd be what you would call the static water level. So and the driller should develop the most favorable water bearing zones and seal off any zones of less desirable quality. Now they don't provide the details that California does, so it's really left up to the discretion of the driller in this case and how they do that. But it's a little bit different too, because a lot of Tennessee is going to be rock wells, and so you're going to be you're going to have to assess the situation based on the rock well. Also, we know that we have salt water, oil and gas, and other fluids that might contaminate a source of fresh water, so we want to make sure those are sealed off as well. Drilling fluids. Okay, casing is where we get to things here. So the casing section, section 5 here, is you really need to have a casing that extends 19 feet below the land surface and 6 feet above the land surface. So they do have some provisions that if you have water sources that are less than 19 feet, but 19 feet is a standard for casing. It's why 19 feet? I am not quite sure on that one. I have asked about that and haven't gotten a satisfactory answer. I think it's really fairly typical soil profile that you're going to be at around 19 feet. You're going to be getting into bedrock and seeding that casing into bedrock. But why 19 feet instead of 20? I don't know. Anyhow, so there's the casing standards. Here's your diameters. Talking about PVC well casing, unconsolidated rock. Now in West Tennessee, anything west of the Tennessee River is going to be unconsolidated material. It's going to be basically going to be a gravel pack well. So they have provisions for that. Middle Tennessee and East Tennessee are pretty much all bedrock wells. So anyhow, here's where water is obtained from the overburden. They want they want you to where it's right in the overburden above the bedrock. They want you to screen it right there, and the topmost perforation is at least 20 feet below the land surface. So that's so you can get an adequate seal in there. And basically, this is the backfilling and grouting. So you can see they do talk about your different sealing methods: pressure grouting, pumping grout in, and then what they call other. So in this case, where you're doing pressure grouting and pumping, they want to have 1.5 inch space between the borehole wall and the casing. In the case of other, whatever that may be, they want 2 inches so you can get an adequate seal. So that is basically, then we move into well screens. So that's basically the Tennessee regulations for sealing wells. In summary, real quick, the source of water for any well shall be at least 19 feet below the surface of the ground. They do have some provisions where it's shallower than that, so there are provisions in there for dealing with that. But generally, that's going to be not good water. So down 19 feet or so, you start to get into, especially in the case of Middle Tennessee, karst, and the water's going to be flowing through and at a pretty good clip. So that's really what you're angling for there. So you want to develop the most favorable water bearing zone and seal off any sources of less desirable quality. But like I said, it's the method is left up to the driller. Whereas in California, they have detailed instructions on how to do this. So a little bit of contrast here. And then the casing needs to extend at least 19 feet below the land surface and 6 inches above the land surface. Um, so the seal requirements, once again, cement or bentonite grout from 3 to 10 feet. So so in that's where you're actually going to do your cement, and they do bentonite. I've seen wells that have bentonite. You can basically pull the casing out because you got bentonite. So I'm not a fan of that. I prefer to cement it in. The remaining annular space between, so if you go to 19 feet, so between 10 and 19 feet, it can be filled with cement, bentonite, sand, puddled clay, or well cuttings, although they do recommend that you use the same material that you use to seal from 3 to 10 feet, which I think is sound advice. And then as we mentioned, if you're doing a pressure or pump emplacement of the grout, you need to have 1.5 inches between the borehole wall and the casing. For other methods, 2 inches is what you need. So that's Tennessee requirements, and you can see what there's a little bit of a contrast. I mean, some of the things are basically the same, but we're dealing with a little bit different geology, and the regulatory requirements are a little lighter hand than in California. So a lot less requirements, and boy, when you get to in California, they go on for pages with the type of cement grout you can use and how it gets mixed and not nearly that level of detail in the Tennessee requirements. And so you're going to see other states are going to be all over the place on these requirements. So that's the requirements. So let's look at a case study here, and I think you'll find this kind of instructive. Um, this is located in Lassen County, California. It is a volcanic bedrock. That's important here. We have 3 wells that are approximately 100 feet deep, and all wells are located in a line within 300 feet of each other. The 2 outside wells had consistent E. coli detections, but the inside well did not. So, which is really interesting because this is what this looks like. The third well is kind of off to the right there, but about the same distance. So you can see they're pretty close together in a bedrock. They're constructed this pretty much the same, about to 100 feet. So why are you getting a coliform in 2 of the 3 wells and not the other one? So that was kind of our challenge here in looking at this. Um, so we pretty well knew that there was we were out in a rural area, so the septic systems were likely the source of the E. coli. I don't think there was too much doubt about that. There is a stream that flows nearby that does have E. coli in it as well, but that's all probably derived from the septic system. So you pretty well know the source, and so that wasn't really in doubt. They were looking at, because they were getting the E. coli hits, they were under a boil water order, and they were looking at an expensive water treatment system to solve this problem. And they were not a big system, less than 300 connections, I believe. And so it was going to be a major expense for them. So we were looking at for some other alternatives to figure out why they were getting the coliform in the well. And once again, like I say, the mystery is why were only 2 of 3 wells impacted when the wells are that close together, and they basically are built to the same depth and have the same construction. So why are we only getting 2 or 3 impacted? 2 of 3 impacted. So first off, we went out and we looked and see, well, do we have any damage to the pedestal that could cause surface water to get in there? And surface water is certainly a source of coliform bacteria. So we looked at that. And you can see this is actually in pretty good shape. This is actually one of the wells, and you can see it's in pretty darn good shape. There's really nothing that's getting down that through that pedestal and getting in the well. So we eliminated that. We looked at other situations. We looked at rainfall versus E. coli hits and water levels versus E. coli hits. So we were really kind of scratching our head until they managed to track down the well logs. So we didn't have those at first. And like I say, I'm a big fan of looking at the well logs and seeing what you got there in well construction. And so this is just the first well log here for well number one. Really not much to be had there. The driller's log is basically they're in lava rock and brown ash and black lava and driller's descriptions of the geology and so no real hints there on what's going on. Here's another well log, and so same situation. You can see it's basically just talking about the basalt and black soil, and so not much there either. But the third well log we got a hit because the driller put notes on this log that really was the key to solving this problem. So we get our normal drill log here, but then they're adding notes here that how they drilled it and let me but the key is these notes here where I have the arrow. So really what it says here is they drilled the well with mud rotary method. They lost circulation at 27 and 48 feet, which means they ran into fracture zones or lava tubes or something where they lost circulation. And lost circulation means that the mud is not staying in the hole. So it's going out. They're losing the mud. So they have a significant void there, and it's probably a fracture or a lava tube or something because all the mud then is going out, and they're trying to fix that. So what they did, and this is astounding to me, but you never can tell what you're going to see when you see the well logs, is they sealed those zones with wood shavings. Why you would do that, I guess maybe I can understand the rationale. They thought they'd throw wood shavings down there and that would keep the mud in and allow it to seal. But wood shavings are not an adequate sealing method. And so what's happened is we probably have either lava tubes or more likely fracture zones in the basalt out here, the volcanic rocks that is creating a pathway that's connecting to the surface that is allowing the shallow groundwater that's impacted from the septic systems with E. coli to migrate through these fractures and into the well, because we only have, in this case, we had a 54-foot seal. Let me go back here. I think that's what that was, is a 55-foot seal. So they had a 55-foot seal, so they were barely below this 48 feet where they lost circulation, and so it's something that they probably the fracture probably did not get adequately sealed off by their well seal, and if they were losing circulation, and using wood shavings, they probably did not really adequately seal off those fractures anyway, is my guess. So our conclusions, a review of the drill logs indicate fracture zones providing possible conduits to the surface for the migration of shallow groundwater impacted with E. coli into the wells, a direct conduit. So that was our conclusion. And fortunately, they had the drill logs, and there was that note on there. You never know what you're going to find. If that one note hadn't been on there, we may still be scratching our heads on this. But that certainly was a real find. And once again, that is why I pull the well logs right away when I'm looking at diagnostics on a well for this situation or any situation. Okay, the second conclusion was really the driller appeared to have inadequately sealed the wells with only the minimum seal okay, you can say the minimum seal is 50 feet. He did 55, so he exceeded the minimum seal, but he was really trying to address that those lost circulation zones or probably fractures, and he did not do a good job of that. So he still had conduits providing a pathway into the well for drinking water, and so really we had an inadequate seal situation. So our recommendation in this case was to extend the wells to 200 feet with 100 feet of seal, which should be adequate, although we recommended doing geologic logging and making sure that you had a geologist out there to make sure that we adequately addressed the fractures, any fractures that we might encounter. So in this case, we looked at both deepening the existing wells, but by the time you resealed them and modified them, it was actually cheaper to go in and actually drill new wells to 200 feet with 100 feet of seal, and so that was the actual solution. So there you go. There's our case study. You can see how important seals really are in this case, because these guys were facing a big expense, a multi-million-dollar expense for a 300 connection system to treat the E. coli situation, when it was actually an issue with their well seals that could be addressed for a lot less than multiple millions of dollars. So, and then it also points out that where the well logs can be a really important diagnostic tool. So I like this case study for both those reasons. You can see how we can use those particular tools. So that's important. So. All right. So wrapping up here, I just wanted to point out we do have, speaking of doing well diagnostics, this won't get you to the well seal issue, but we do have a resource guide that we have for free out there for the well health check for diagnosing well problems. This is the URL to go to that. That is, here's a QR code actually. So this, because we can't, I guess I can drop that into chat. So let me drop that into chat for you here. So you can get the URL in chat. Yeah, there you go. And on YouTube. So either way, you can use the QR code, or you can use the URL that's in the chat, and go and get this resource. It's a good guide. If you got any questions as you go through there, I'm always available. tballard@groundwaterguy.com. And our website is sehydrogeology.com for Southeast Hydrogeology. I am a hydrogeological consultant, so you can always get a hold of me. I'm always happy to chat with people and see what we can figure out for you. So we stream this both into YouTube at the Groundwater Guy channel and also on my profile on LinkedIn. So we stream those at the same time, so you can watch us either place. I find LinkedIn to be a little quirky sometimes, but like last week, my stream didn't start when it was supposed to. I have no idea why. So LinkedIn can be a little quirky, but a lot of people watch this on the Groundwater Guy channel. All our past shows are on the Groundwater channel, or Groundwater Guy channel, so you can go there and we got a whole bunch of different shows on different topics, and you're more than welcome to do that. But if you got any comments and want to see anything that to talk about in the future, let me know. So if you want to be a guest on Groundwater Talk Live, here's the link for that. You can schedule up a time if you got something to share with the water community. We'd love to have you on the show. We're going to try to do some more guests here. I've had a bunch of topics that I wanted to cover, but we're going to try to get some guests on here. So, all right. So wrapping up, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can hit the bell to know when we posted up new videos, but we're here every week, every Thursday, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Central time, Groundwater Guy YouTube channel, and on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you got something out of this. And once again, I'm always available for any questions. Thank you, and we'll see